couple of nights ago, Ice Cube was hanging out with Kennedy and Dennis Kucinich, and they put out a photo on Twitter, on Kennedy's official Twitter account with Ice
Yep.
Cube. And it says, Dennis and I spent a wonderful evening with one of our country's most influential and outspoken civil rights leaders. And Margaret Kimberly, who's someone I have a lot of respect for, she took issue with that. She
Mm,
said, and she quoted Malcolm X.
mm,
She responded saying, "Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders." And she said, "Does RFK Jr. know any black people? If so, pull his coattail. I have nothing against Ice Cube, but he isn't a black leader. Nope." I don't
mm.
understand even what she's talking about there. And I have so much respect for Margaret. I know she doesn't like Kennedy for some reason. She's got her reasons, but that seems like a strange swipe at Ice Cube. How
Yeah.
can you say
So
he's not a black leader?
yeah, I mean, when you think about what he actually stood for, he actually brought a lot of the complaints about police brutality and what was
Right.
going on in Black communities to the
Yeah.
mainstream, and he brought a new generation of young Americans, white, Black, of all races, together like around the music. And he single-handedly probably got a lot more people involved, or at least aware of some of the issues than they would have been like outside of that. So on her critique, of calling him a leader, I think what she's trying to say there is Ice Cube may not be, the Malcolm X or the Martin Luther King style civil rights activist where he spends all of his time going into it. However, if you really look at the people who are most known in the Black community today, that does tend to be athletes, as well as
Right.
musicians and one or two politicians. So unfortunately, if you want to look at who has the most influence and who has the biggest voice, that is going to be some of the entertainers. Now, you can take a look overall, at society. And I think that's a little bit of a microcosm of what's happening overall in America because people overall are paying more attention to celebrities and celebrity drama than actually what's happening in the world. However, in the Black community, we don't have like a Malcolm X or a MLK style person today because unfortunately, most people don't seem to like, well, they were just once in a lifetime people,
That's
that's
right.
part of it. And they had, more courage. So I think, her critique may come from the fact that maybe some people, aren't as he's not like I can think of a few people in the Black community who are more politically involved and more politically engaged and have been speaking some, like truth for a while. So, Cornell West, who's in the race also, he would be an example of someone, who's done some of that. Margaret Kimberly herself, like she
Yeah.
is very outspoken.
Mhm.
There's another gentleman by the name of Riza Islam, who's with the Nation of Islam. I don't know if you've heard of him
I
before, but
have.
he's been speaking a lot of truth about the vaccines in particular and some of the deep state corruption. So there are other people out there, who have a greater knowledge of the topics and who dive into the topics a little bit deeper. So I think what RFK was really trying to do was encourage more athletes and more rappers and more celebrities in general to really get more politically engaged and more politically involved. So I think she took it in the worst possible, like
Yeah.
context
I'm afraid
instead of
so.
because he was really just trying to give Ice Cube credit for
Mhm.
speaking out. And I've listened to, I'm a big fan of Ice Cube. Like it
Me
was a good
too.
day.
I mean,
Is
all the
like,
way back to 1985.
yeah,
That's how long I've been
exactly.
listening
I
to
can
Ice
rap
Cube and
the
NWA, man.
exactly. I can
It's high
rap the
school.
entire song. It was a good day
Me
from
too.
start to finish.
Yep.
Exactly. Who doesn't love that? Just waking up in the morning, gotta thank God. You know, that's a iconic line. And
Oh
if
yeah.
you look at some of his more recent music, he's actually getting more politically engaged, and he's
Yeah.
actually more politically outspoken than even he was back then. So, you know, I think the pushback, is, in my opinion, taking it in the worst possible light. And instead, what we should be doing is encouraging, more rappers and athletes to get involved in these situations and to use their voice to also prop up some of the people who are speaking these truths, because you don't really like, no, none of the people I mentioned are a household name the way Ice Cube is. So
Right.
yeah, that's what I would say. So I do think, and like you mentioned at the beginning, like of this whole conversation, people in general pay more attention to celebrities, athletes and musicians than they do to politicians and businessmen a lot of the time. And just because no one really trusts the government and no one really trusts a lot of these mainstream people, so I feel like they've kind of just given up hope on that side to an extent. So
Mhm.
instead, they just focus on the fun stuff and who
And
they like
a
in the
lot
fun
of
stuff.
people trust Ice
Yeah.
Cube, not just in the
Yeah.
black community, but in the white community and all kinds
Mhm.
of communities. I mean, he makes great music. He's always been a voice of our social conscience as a nation.
Mhm.
And I would argue that Ice Cube, I don't know if I'd call him a civil rights leader, but I would call him a leader, a thought leader, an activist, and he's been red pilling us about with the truth about what's happening in the black community since the 80s.
Mhm.
I would argue that he's done more for Black America as any civil rights leader. I think he's been a great leader for the Black community, and he never sold out, which is
Mhm.
something I respect about Ice. And he's his own man. He
Mhm.
doesn't let anybody tell him what to think or say. And remember, he got backlash during the 2020 election merely for saying, he put out a video and he said, "Hey, Joe Biden, if you want my vote, what do I get in return?
Mhm.
You got to earn my vote. What do I get?
Yep.
Just, am I supposed to vote for you just because I'm black? You're going to have to do better than that, buddy." And he took so much crap just for saying that.
Well,
And now it's happening again that he's palling around with Kennedy and he's
and
getting,
that's the exact same thing that he said to the radio host Charlemagne the God
yes,
during the interview. Like,
right.
Charlemagne the God was essentially asking him, which is what you're supposed to do with politicians. You have to ask them, what is your agenda? How are you
Mhm.
going to make my life better? How are you going to help my community? And it's not all about helping the Black community, because there are different communities in the country. However, if you're going to appeal to the Black vote, there should be something like in the agenda that you can speak to, like that is addressing the problems that are specific to that community. So, and he's not the only person to come to create this sentiment. Breonna Joy Gray, who was a former communications chair for the Bernie Sanders campaign, she's very outspoken about that same topic. One of my favorite YouTube host Jimmy Dore. He's extremely outspoken about that topic. Kim Iverson, pretty much anyone who is independent minded and not just captive to the party, whether it's because they're on the payroll or they just don't want to mentally, step up to the plate like that. I feel like once you realize what politics is about, you have to demand something for your vote. Otherwise, they're just going to get in there and do things that benefit their campaign donors. And that's what we've been getting since the Supreme Court decided that money equals free speech. And, there are multiple things, there are a lot of factors that have gone into, the situation we have in the country today. But that's a big one. So, you know,
Yeah.
I think
And
everyone should actually be doing that, because if politicians feel like they don't have to do something for you in order to earn your vote, they're not going to do anything for you. Why would they do
exactly.
something for you?
Exactly.
Yeah, make them earn it and make them come up with a real plan. And and that's what Jimmy Dore tried to do with Force the
Force
Vote.
the
I don't
vote.
know if you remember that
Sure.
campaign, but exactly. And that was a moment in time that for me, it opened my eyes to a lot of like what was going on. And I realized even amongst the people who I thought were the resistance, there really isn't as much resisting, and it's a lot more posturing than anything. So I think everyone needs to demand more from their politicians. And we have to realize the less we pay attention, the worse it's going to get, because the dollar is facing inflation. We have a skyrocketing debt. This situation isn't going to correct itself. So we either come together and come up with a plan, or they get to implement their CBDC, where if you want to eat, you have to sign up for their totalitarian currency in order to buy
hell
food.
no.
So yeah, so
Hell
we
no.
have to all come together and wake up to what's really going on. So
And let's not forget here that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running in the Democratic Party primaries. And
exactly.
unfortunately, the majority of Black Americans vote Democrat. So he's got to get out there and convince them why they should vote for him and not for Joe Biden, which I think would be a pretty easy sell, because Joe Biden really hasn't done anything for Black America. Am I wrong? I mean, Jay, what has he done for all the people he
Well, if you
voted
look
for in
at his
2020?
Bidenomics bragging, what he's saying is that under his economy, it's added more jobs than, like past presidents. But if you look at the situation that happened before, with the pandemic causing a whole ton of layoffs, and you look at the quality of jobs that are actually coming out now, you have people working more in order to try to make ends meet. And you also have record lows in terms of labor force participation. So what has he done for the Black community? Nothing. He
Nothing
hasn't really
that I
done
can
anything.
see.
Yeah, like short answer to that.
I'm looking everywhere. I can't find anything. So,
yeah,
I mean, some
exactly.
might say that Kennedy is pandering to try and win Black votes by doing this, but this is politics. This is what you got to do. And it's important. It's vital right now, because the Democratic Party has changed the primary calendar, as you know, where they want to put South Carolina first. And I guess that's going to be the plan. So Kennedy is focusing his efforts mostly in Iowa and New Hampshire, the traditional first in the nation primaries. But if they do that, this is where it gets ugly. The Democratic Party is playing hardball. Basically, they're saying if New Hampshire and Iowa go ahead with their primaries being first before South Carolina, that if Kennedy wins or whoever wins, those delegates will be thrown out at the convention next summer, and basically those delegates won't count. So that's a real hardball move, and it seems to me that Kennedy needs to pivot and get his ass down to South Carolina and start winning those votes, because that's a strongly Black voting bloc in South Carolina. That's how Biden won, because he's got Black voters wrapped up. And, there just aren't a lot of Black voters in New Hampshire and Iowa. There's a hell of a lot more of them in South Carolina. So, Kennedy needs to make that pivot, and he needs to start working on getting the Black vote. And if a guy named Robert Kennedy cannot get the Black vote, there's something seriously amiss in America, for all of the things that his father did for, Black voting rights in this country, for equal rights in education. And, he was beloved by Black Americans. You would think that Kennedy's name alone would get the attention of a lot of Black voters, but name recognition is not enough. History lessons about his father are not enough. He's got to get down there and win hearts and minds and convince them that he will actually do something good for the Black community besides talk.